welcome to both of you, Matthew and Stefanie.
Good morning.
Morning.
Morning. Let's talk about the French presidential elections, because Emmanuel Macron, he won the first round. He got 27.6% of the vote, and the far right's Marine Le Pen got 23.41%. Macron is saying he's going to unite all the different convictions and beliefs if re-elected, whereas Le Pen has called on every non-Macron voter to join her and put France back in order. How surprised are you, Stefanie, that this was so close between Macron and Le Pen in the first round?
I wasn't really so surprised. I mean, I was surprised by how badly in the end Eric Zemmour did. But what I found most striking when I looked at the results last night was that over 50% of the French voters voted for either extreme left or extreme right. So for Mélenchon or for Marine Le Pen. That, I suppose, tells you a lot about France and in what place French voters are, and that they must be very unhappy with Macron's work and with the situation France is in. And of course, they have suffered terribly, the French, with terror attacks, the pandemic, like everyone else. But there must be, I assume, a lot of insecurity in people, and therefore they vote for these extreme parties.
Matthew, come in on this, because we were talking earlier on to our correspondent in Paris, and he was talking about the real change of image that Marine Le Pen has undergone. She's changed her voice. She's becoming softer. She's not that kind of shouty, far-right politician that we once saw, and she's trying to soften her image to appeal to more people.
Yeah, that's true. But she still, I think it's fair to say, represents a rejection of the post-war consensus. It's the same for me if you look in the United States too, that there is a real sense of discontent with growing economic inequality in the West, reduced from about 1945 till 1980. Then it started to widen, particularly strongly in the United States, but to a lesser extent in France, Germany, and the UK. And I think that dissatisfaction, it's fascinating. You would expect that greater economic inequality would lead to a greater uplift for the left. And there has been increased interest in more far left ideas in the United States and the UK. But it's often the far right who trade on an anti-immigrant ticket who tend to get the electoral dividend. And I think the French election result really fits into that. You're right, Le Pen has tried to soften some of her views. I think I'm right in saying she wants to remain in the European Union and to retain the euro. But nevertheless, I think it is a profound rejection of what Macron and others stand for. But having said that, I'm quite pleased to see that Macron, according to the bookmaker, do we trust the bookmakers anymore when it comes to the election result? But he's still 6-1 on to win. I think he's a very strong favourite, so long as he campaigns hard and exposes the contradictions and tensions in the Le Pen manifesto.
Stefanie, how worried should the UK be if Marine Le Pen does get elected? I mean, as Matthew says, she wants to stay in the EU, but she does want to leave NATO. And to have a far-right leader in France so close by, I mean, there would be implications for here, but also across the rest of Europe.
Yeah, very much. And I'm actually currently in Germany. It's quite interesting to see the comments here and how the analysis goes by German media and German politicians. And not only for the UK, but I mean, the British Prime Minister is a lot talking about the need of Western unity when it comes to the war in Ukraine, whether it's delivering weapons, whether it's sanctions, or whether it's how this war should actually end. And if you look at Marine Le Pen, still, she welcomed the referendum in 2014 of Crimea. She hasn't really said much about the atrocities committed in Bucha and other places in Ukraine. She is reportedly funded by Russian, her party is allegedly funded by Russian sources. I mean, you can read it up in German media a lot. She's very close to Putin. She's met him a lot. So what does that mean? And it's only in 2 weeks' time that you will have this election. What does it mean for the unity, not only of the EU, of course, when it comes to the sanction regime, but also to the unity of the West towards Russia, and that very, very dangerous situation that Europe and beyond are in. So I think, I mean, I can I can sense in Germany a lot of nervousness about that, and I assume back in my home in the UK it will be similar.
We're going to move on and talk about Rishi Sunak now. It's been a hard weekend for the Chancellor, a hard weekend of questioning. Now he has asked the PM's advisors to review his declaration of interest. He claims he's confident the outcomes of the investigation will show that he has followed the rules. Matthew Syed, that probably will be the outcome. But it's quite interesting because in your column yesterday in the Times, you talked about Rishi Sunak demonstrating a certain slipperiness, a promiscuity with the truth, and also a default to dishonesty. Can you just explain what you mean?
Well, I think it relates very much to the previous story. I think most people have a sense, and it's a completely legitimate sense, that the elites, the economic and to a certain extent the political elites, operate to a different set of rules to the rest of us. When they hear about non-dom status, when they hear about tax havens, and there's allegations that Sunak is a beneficiary of his wife's tax havens, and other of these tax avoidance strategies, I don't think they doubt that Sunak has operated according to the rules. What they worry is that there's a different set of rules for the rich than there is for everyone else who can't afford the expensive accountants. What fascinated me about Sunak's response, and this goes to the heart of my fear, that he's demonstrating the slipperiness of this modern incarnation of the Tory party, is the original statement said that his wife couldn't pay UK taxes whilst being an Indian citizen. That turned out to be untrue. And Sunak, who approved the statement, as I understand it, must have known it was untrue when it was issued. He then implied in an interview with The Sun that this unease, this legitimate unease about his tax status, was because of racism. I think that was completely outrageous as a claim, and for me, devalued Sunak. He's a very clever and ruthless politician. He's focused on building his own personal brand. He's alienated some of his other conservatives as a consequence. And my genuine view is that it's highly unlikely that he will ever become Prime Minister.
Well, that's really interesting. I wanted to ask you about Sajid Javid, actually, because he also had to come out and say, well, I was a non-dom for a while before public office. And I shouldn't laugh, but I did laugh because apparently he was able to say he was a non-dom because his father was born in Pakistan. The reason I'm laughing is because my father was also born in Pakistan. So there you go. I've learned today that I could be a non-dom. What does all of this mean, Matthew, do you think? I mean, you know, we spoke to George Eustace about it today, and he said, well, you know, this was before he was a minister. But does this go to your previous point of certain schemes, certain knowledge being open, being accessible to a certain group of people?
So there is another issue here. By the way, my father lived in Pakistan before me coming to the UK. He was actually born in India, so I could also
there you go.
Be a non-dom. So one debate that I think has been very interesting below the line at the Times and the Sunday Times on our website edition is whether it is morally legitimate to minimize one's tax bill within the law.
Yeah.
My own view is that aggressive tax avoidance is ethically dubious. I'm in a fortunate enough position to be able to afford an accountant and to be offered schemes of various kinds, tax havens and those film schemes that were remarkably clearly loopholes that enabled richer people to avoid paying the taxes that most ordinary. And I think it's okay to reject those and to say, no, that's a bit too much and too far. What fascinated me about this exclusive yesterday on Sajid Javid is what we didn't find out about where he was paying his taxes when he was using this non-dom status. It will have to come out in the end. And I would urge the brilliant investigative journalists on the papers, on our papers, that have been really running brilliant exclusives to keep the pressure on. I think the public has a right to know whether its elected representatives have been paying taxes of the kind that they would expect them to pay. We also, of course, need to shut down those loopholes which are unquestionably being exploited.
Stefanie, you know, Matthew's made the obvious point there that, you know, Rishi Sunak did have this very highly managed, very slick image, a social media image, and that's come crashing down. How badly do you think he will be affected by this?
I think I agree with Matthew that this will haunt him for forever now. And I must say, I'm really surprised because we, as you just said, I mean, we were quite impressed by his smooth operating of social media, for example. I mean, remember all these fantastic, very leisure Instagram photos that were taken before he did his budget statements and so on. So it's really surprising that he has not prevented this from happening, because sooner or later these things will come. And the way he tried to get himself out of the situation was surprisingly amateurish, I thought. And I mean, my experience from the years I've been living in the UK, once you are in the headlines, you won't escape. You will have to pay your price. And I thought he would have been much faster in admitting that he had done a mistake and get his wife to stop her status. But just one word, I mean, in other countries in Europe, I mean, for example, in Germany, we have this high-profile case of Uli Hoeneß, who used to be the president of Bayern München, and he went into prison 3 years for tax evasion. So, and I can't remember any high-profile, but correct me if I'm wrong, high-profile cases in the UK where people got into prison because of tax evasion. And I think there's something to be thought about to stop people from thinking, well, I'm rich enough to pay all the good tax advisors and can get out of paying too much taxes.
Let's talk about another story that's on the front page of The Times today. It's reported that nearly 50% of NHS maternity services in England are deemed unsafe. So of 193 NHS maternity services in England, 80 are rated as inadequate or requires improvement, failing to meet basic safety standards. And reading here, 8 of the hospitals which are at the lowest level regarded as inadequate, one of them is the Morecambe Bay NHS Foundation Trust, which back in 2015, a report concluded there was a lethal mix of failings that had led to the deaths of 11 babies and 1 mother. And the report recommended several urgent changes. That's just one example. And you wonder why it is taking so long to improve maternity services. Matthew, is it just that we don't see it as a priority in this country?
No, I think the problem is much deeper. This is a complete scandal. And it's partly about maternity and partly about the NHS more generally. I read the Morecambe Bay report, a brilliant report by the Kirkup report in full, and the recommendations were absolutely spot on. What it effectively said is that children were dying, newborns were dying avoidably because lessons were not being learned about systemic failures in a whole range of ways in that particular maternity unit, the monitoring of babies and various other protocols that, had they been deployed, children's lives would have been saved. The fact that this hasn't now been improved, either there or throughout much of the NHS's maternity provision, shows to me that there are 2 problems. One is a blame culture. When frontline clinicians are open and honest about mistakes, they're often put on trial for, well, not often, but they can be put on trial for culpable homicide, or they may be struck off, or there may be punitive action. And that means instead of being open and honest about mistakes, which leads to the reforms and the transparency that's so important, they tend to cover them up. That's one problem. The other problem is a sense of what I've sometimes called institutional narcissism, the idea that the reputation of the NHS, this great national religion, is almost so important and so precious that people respond to criticism and the legitimate concerns of patients by blaming them rather than taking on board their concerns. So effectively, the NHS is not an adaptive mechanism. It is not a self-correcting institution. And that goes to the heart of the problem. And it's a very deep problem, and one that Jeremy Hunt, as Secretary of State, tried to fix, but it's still in play.
Stefanie, what's the situation in Germany or wider across Europe? If there are problems like this in a health system, are whistleblowers listened to, or is there a culture of blame like the one that Matthew's talking about?
Well, I'm sure that all health systems in Europe have similar problems, although I must say, and I mean, maybe also because it's maternity leaves and it's mothers dying and newborns dying. And yeah, I mean, as a mother, you know, there's never a situation in your life you're more vulnerable than when you are giving birth. And I had my child on the NHS, and it was a fantastic experience. But what I mean, comparing it again, I can only compare it with Germany. What I find a big difference is that women in the mothers to be in the UK are a bit treated like well, you get into hospital, you have your child, and you get home as quick as possible. Of course, if there's a complicated pregnancy, then there's more care. But in general, my feeling is that it's something like you shouldn't complain too much when you have a child. It's natural, just have it and go home. The UK has the record time of sending women home after giving birth, and I think the whole approach could be a bit, really more caring. And then, of course, the systemic failures of the Care Commission itself, actually giving Shrewsbury in 2015 a good rating, and then saying the year afterwards that there shouldn't be anything investigated. I mean, there have to be really profound questions being asked to the Care Commission and the NHS maternity system.
We're going to finish just briefly talking about Libby Purvis's column in the Times today. She is saying the eco-protesters only harm their own cause, saying that radical protest tactics like blocking roads and gluing yourself to buildings will only drive away voting support. Matthew, I wonder whether we've changed our opinion on this, whether things that used to be inconvenient are less inconvenient now, whether people still have that kind of view. What do you think?
Yeah, I read Libby's column. As always, it's a really wise column. And I mean, she says that she completely believes in the cause of reducing our carbon emissions and pollution and many of the other things that people on the what's called the green part of the spectrum really believe in. But she argues that tactically this is alienating voters. And to be honest, I think I probably feel the same way, that breaking the law in the way that they are doing and inconveniencing people who might be going to hospital or visiting a sick relative, it's undermining the cause. And for that reason, she says, and I'm with her on this, it's self-defeating.
Stefanie, what do you think?
I'm a bit torn about that, to be honest, because I think Extinction Rebellion has done some fantastic work. It has really so much empowered the attention and the awareness of people of the harm we are doing to our planet. But then, of course, I completely agree that if it's stopping the tube system in London, or whether it's stopping the M25, people trying to get to their loved ones who are in an ambulance and might be dying, and you're stuck because somebody's protesting about insulation not being fitted. Yeah, that's self-defeating.
Well, it's interesting. I do have a read of that column. It's in the Times today, Libby Purvis's column in the Times. Thank you so much to both of you.